How long can you pretend to be invisible when a stranger's gaze feels like a brand, marking you as his from across a crowded room? Chapter 1. The Unseen. Echo. The great hall buzzed. It was a living thing, breathing with the warmth of 100 bodies, the scent of roasting boar, and the sharp, clean smell of pine from the ceremonial wreaths. Laughter bounced off the high-raftered ceiling, a sound so foreign it felt like it belonged to another world entirely. From my corner, pressed into the cold stone by the hearth, I watched it all. A ghost at the feast. For years, I had perfected the art of being invisible, a skill learned from the moment my mother's light went out and the pack's eyes slid right over me. They looked at me and saw weakness, a broken line, an echo of a she-wolf too gentle for this world. So, I learned to fold myself into the shadows, to make my presence as quiet as a falling snowflake. It was safer this way, less painful. My goal tonight was simple: survive. Just get through the ceremony without the crushing weight of their pity, or worse, their complete indifference making me shatter. But even with my head down, a strange, prickling sensation crawled up my spine. A feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. Someone is watching me. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the firelight. A stray thought. Why would anyone look at the pack's forgotten daughter? Still, I couldn't stop the foolish, traitorous flicker of hope that made me lift my chin. My eyes scanned the throng of dancing bodies and boisterous warriors. Then I saw him. Across the hall, half shrouded in the gloom beyond the main fire pit, stood a man I had never seen before. He wasn't from our pack. His scent, even from here, was different, wilder, like a coming storm and ancient earth. He was tall, built with a coiled power that made the warriors around him seem like boys. And his eyes, they were locked directly on me. Not on the Alpha's daughter preening by the throne, not on the celebration, but on me. The intensity in his stare was a physical blow, a scorching heat that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't pity, it wasn't disgust, it was something else, something possessive. A flicker of interest so hot I felt it like a brand against my skin. How long can you pretend to be invisible when a stranger's gaze feels like a claim, marking you as his from across a crowded room? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the joyous music of the hall. I quickly dropped my gaze back to the floor, my cheeks burning. It had to be my imagination. A desperate fantasy born from a decade of yearning for just one person to truly see me. No one ever does. Chapter 2. A crack in the facade. Minutes later, the stranger's unsettling stare was replaced by a more familiar kind of torment. The whispers started, slithering through the noise of the hall like smoke. "Look at her!" A voice, slick with fake sympathy, drifted from a nearby group of she-wolves. Still alone. You'd think she'd learn to stay home. My hands trembled, my knuckles white where I gripped the wooden cup in my hands. I kept my eyes fixed on the worn leather of my boots, praying they would move on, find someone else to dissect. But they were just getting started. "Mark was smart to drop her," another one added, her tone sharp. "Who would want a mate from such a weak bloodline? She carries her mother's scent, the smell of tragedy." The mention of my mother was a knife twisting in a wound that never healed. Then, as if summoned by their cruelty, I saw him. Mark. He was my first real heartbreak, the boy who had courted me for a month before deciding I wasn't enough. He wasn't alpha material, but he was my one chance at not being utterly alone. He walked past my little corner now, his arm slung possessively around a pretty she-wolf with fire in her hair and a smug smile on her face. He didn't even glance my way. It was as if I was nothing more than a piece of the stone wall I was hiding against. The pain was so sharp, so sudden, it made me dizzy. My cup slipped. I fumbled, a pathetic little gasp escaping my lips as I tried to catch it, my movements clumsy and panicked. This was it. The final humiliation. I would drop my drink, draw every eye in the hall, and become the center of their mocking attention. The world tilted, a blur of firelight and sneering faces. But the crash never came. A hand shot out of nowhere, a blur of motion, strong and sure. It closed around the falling cup, fingers wrapping around mine, stopping its descent just inches from the floor. The touch was electric, a jolt of raw power that seemed to hum right through my veins, grounding me instantly. It wasn't just strength. It was an anchor in my swirling sea of shame. I slowly looked up, my breath caught in my throat. It was him, the alpha stranger. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His jaw was sharp, his dark hair fell over a brow creased with something that wasn't quite a frown. And his eyes, and those piercing golden eyes, were fixed on me with a burning intensity that made my knees feel weak. He wasn't looking at the cup, he was looking at me. Chapter 3. The first word time seemed to stop. The loud music of the hall faded into a distant hum. The cruel whispers, the ghost of my past rejections. Everything vanished. There was only the heat of his fingers against mine, and the storm in his golden eyes. My heart, which had been hammering with humiliation, now beat with a different, wilder rhythm, a frantic, hopeful, terrified tempo. He held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable but intense. I felt stripped bare, as if he could see every scar on my soul, every lonely night, every silent tear. He saw the invisible girl, and he didn't look away. Then he spoke. His voice was a low rumble, a deep, quiet sound that cut through the noise of the celebration like a wolf's growl in the dead of night. "Are you okay?" Just 3 words, the first words anyone had spoken directly to me all night. But they weren't spoken with pity. They were laced with genuine concern, a raw sincerity that cracked the fragile shield around my heart. I couldn't find my own voice. I could only stare, caught in the gravity of his presence. His scent wrapped around me, a dizzying mix of night air, pine, and something else. Something dangerously, impossibly familiar. It felt like a memory I'd never had, a home I'd never known. Where did I know that scent from? Before I could answer, before I could even nod, a snarling voice cut through our bubble. "Blackwood!" The word was spat like a curse. A burly warrior from a neighboring pack, Jax, stepped between us, his body tense. He glared at the stranger, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife at his belt. "You're a long way from your own territory." The stranger, Blackwood, didn't even flinch. He slowly released my hand, though his eyes lingered on me for a second longer, a silent promise or a warning, I couldn't tell. Then he turned his head to face Jax, and the quiet concern in his expression was gone, replaced by the cold authority of a true alpha. "I go where I please," he said, his voice dropping an octave, laced with a threat that made the air crackle. He gave me one last fleeting look, and then he was gone. He melted back into the crowd as if he were a shadow, leaving me standing there, my hand tingling where he'd touched me. The bond, or whatever that feeling was, lingered like fire under my skin. The invisible girl had been seen, and I had a terrifying feeling that my life would never, ever be the same. Chapter 4. A Savage Salvation. The fire under my skin from Blackwood's touch propelled me out of the great hall. I needed air. I needed silence. The noise, the stares, the sudden terrifying feeling of being seen. It was too much. I stumbled out into the cool night, gulping down deep breaths of crisp autumn air that did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. The celebration's roar softened behind me as I walked toward the edge of the woods, the familiar scent of damp earth and fallen leaves a balm to my frayed nerves. I just wanted a moment of peace, a second to put the mask of invisibility back on. But the forest, usually a place of quiet comfort, felt wrong. The chirping of crickets had ceased. The gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze had gone still. An unnatural silence fell, thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. Then, a new scent hit the air. It was foul, a bitter smell of mangy fur and malice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. They weren't from my pack. They weren't from any known pack. They were rogues. Before I could scream, they were on me. 3 of them, their forms shifting from man to wolf in a grotesque ripple of snapping bone and stretching skin. Their eyes glowed with a hungry feral light. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I scrambled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on the ground. They closed in, a triangle of snarling teeth and low growls savoring my fear. This is how it ends, I thought, a wave of despair washing over me. Alone, unseen, torn apart at the edge of a celebration I was never truly a part of. But just as the lead wolf lunged, a blur of gray fur and dripping jaws, a shadow erupted from the trees. It was a roar of pure fury, a sound so powerful it shook the very ground. A massive black wolf, bigger than any I had ever seen, slammed into the attacker, a whirlwind of black fur and righteous rage. It was him. It had to be him. Blackwood. He moved with a terrifying grace, a brutal dance of death. A sickening snap echoed as he broke one rogue's neck. He tore into the second with claws that ripped through flesh and muscle. The third tried to flee, but the black wolf was impossibly fast, dragging it down with a final guttural snarl. The fight was over in seconds. It was a violent, terrifying, breathtaking display of alpha power. He stood over the last fallen rogue, his massive chest heaving, his fur spattered with blood that wasn't his. Then, he turned to me. The feral rage in his golden eyes softened just for a moment as they met mine, and in that instant I felt it. A jolt, not of fear, but of connection. A white-hot spark that shot through my entire body, a string of fate pulling taut between our souls. It was unmistakable, undeniable. The mate bond. Chapter 5. Scent of a Soul. My first instinct, born from a lifetime of fear, was to run. That spark, that impossible connection to a rival alpha who had just saved my life through brutal violence, was not a gift. It was a death sentence. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle, and fled back toward the lights of the great hall. My one thought to escape him, to deny what my very soul was screaming at me. The pack means safety. He means destruction. I didn't get far. A hand clamped down on my arm, his grip firm but not painful, spinning me around to face him. He was human again, the transformation seamless, leaving him standing before me bare-chested and breathing hard, the blood of the rogues a stark map across his skin. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, his golden eyes blazing with a confusing mix of fury and desperation. "Stop," he growled, his voice rough. "Don't run from me." I tried to wrench my arm free, but it was like pulling against a mountain. "Let me go," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They'll see us. My alpha—" "I don't care about your alpha." He cut me off, his gaze pinning me in place. He took a step closer, his scent, that wild storm of pine and earth, overwhelming my senses. He leaned in, his nose just inches from my neck, and took a deep, shuddering breath. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pained disbelief. "Why?" he murmured, his voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't name. "Why do you smell like you belong to me?" The question hung in the air between us, a truth so dangerous it could get us both killed. My mind raced. If I admitted it, if I acknowledged the bond, my pack would mark me a traitor. They would cast me out or worse. He was an enemy, the alpha of the Blackwood pack, our oldest rivals. Fate was cruel. It had finally given me someone who saw me only to make him the one person I could never have. I had to protect myself. I had to lie. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, pulling my arm with all my might. "You're crazy. You just killed 3 rogues. You're not thinking straight." His eyes narrowed, the desperation hardening into cold fury. He knew I was lying. He could probably smell it on me. "You feel it too," he stated. Not a question, but a fact. "Don't you dare deny it." When I just shook my head, a tear of pure terror tracing a path down my cheek, a muscle in his jaw clenched. He looked like he wanted to shake me, to force the truth out. But instead, he let go. His hand dropped from my arm as if burned. "Go," he snarled, turning away. "Run back to them. But know this, I will not let you go." I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I ran, my heart shattering with every step, not stopping until I reached the edge of the firelight where I saw Jax and 2 other pack warriors watching me emerge from the darkness, their faces masks of cold, hard suspicion. Chapter 6. Claimed in shadow and light. The whispers that had followed me all night turned into a storm. Jax's version of the story spread through the pack like wildfire, that I had slipped away for a secret meeting, that I had lured the Blackwood Alpha onto our lands. He conveniently left out the part about the rogues. No one asked for my side of the story. They didn't need it. I was the weak link, the outcast. It was easier to believe I was a traitor than to believe an enemy had saved one of their own. Within the hour, I was dragged before my alpha, Alistair. We stood before the council fire, the flames casting flickering, judgmental shadows on the faces of the pack elders. Alistair's face was a grim mask of disappointment. He was a hard man, a leader who valued strength and loyalty above all else. In his eyes, I had neither. "Ella," he began, his voice cold and heavy. "You have been accused of treason, of consorting with our sworn enemy, Adrian Blackwood, on sacred ground during a pack ceremony. How do you answer?" "It's not true," I cried, my voice thin and reedy. "There were rogues. They attacked me. He saved my life." Jax scoffed from beside the Alpha. "A convenient story. I saw them talking. Intimate. He disappeared the moment he saw me. She is lying to protect her lover. He is not my lover." The desperation in my voice only made me sound guiltier. I looked around at the faces of my pack, the people I had grown up with. I saw no sympathy, no belief, only condemnation. My entire life, I had been invisible. Now, finally, everyone was looking at me, and all they saw was a traitor. I was well and truly alone. Alistair raised his hand for silence. "The punishment for this betrayal," he said, his voice ringing with finality, "is death." My blood ran cold. This was it, my end. But just as the words settled, a new voice cut through the night, as cold and sharp as breaking ice. "She is under my protection." Every head snapped toward the shadows. Adrian Blackwood stepped into the firelight, his presence sucking all the air from the clearing. He was now clothed in dark leathers, the blood washed away, but he looked even more dangerous. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a panther, his golden eyes fixed on Alistair, completely ignoring the gasps and growls from the surrounding warriors. He stopped right beside me, a solid wall of power and authority. He didn't look at me, but I could feel the heat radiating from him, a protective shield against the hatred of my pack. Alistair bristled, his own alpha nature rising to the challenge. "You dare step onto my land and make demands, Blackwood?" "I dare," Adrian replied, his voice a low, deadly calm. "Harm her, and you will find out what the Blackwood Pact does to those who touch what is mine." The declaration hung in the air, a public claim that sealed my fate. I was no longer just the invisible girl. I was the enemy Alpha's property, a traitor claimed in shadow and light. And as the eyes of my pack burned into me, I knew I had no home to run back to anymore. Chapter 7. The Line Between Hate and Hunger. Life in the aftermath of Adrian's claim was a new kind of hell. Before, I was a ghost, an unseen sorrow drifting through the pack. Now, I was a monster, a living, breathing symbol of their deepest hatreds. They didn't speak to me, but their silence was louder than any shout. It was a suffocating, heavy thing, filled with accusation. My food was left on a cold stone outside my hut, as if I were a diseased animal. The she-wolves would turn their backs when I walked by. The warriors would spit on the ground. I had gone from being invisible to being a stain they couldn't wash out. My pack, my home, was now my prison. After 3 days of this crushing isolation, I had to escape. I fled to the woods, the only place I could breathe, and ran until my lungs burned, finally collapsing against the rough bark of an ancient oak. Tears of rage and despair streamed down my face. This was his fault, all of it. "I hate you," I whispered to the empty forest. "Do you hear me? I hate you." "I hear you." The voice, low and dangerously close, came from directly behind me. I gasped and spun around. Adrian stood there, leaning against a neighboring tree as if he'd been there the whole time. He was dressed in simple black leathers, his presence a stark, powerful slash against the dappled sunlight. "What do you want?" I snarled, wiping my tears away with the back of my hand. "Haven't you done enough?" "I made sure you were safe," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Safe?" I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "You call this safe? I'm a prisoner in my own home. Your protection is a cage and my pack are the guards. They look at me like I'm a traitor." "You would be dead if I hadn't stepped in," he shot back, pushing off the tree and taking a step toward me. "Is that what you wanted?" "I wanted to be left alone." I shoved at his chest, a useless gesture against a wall of solid muscle. "You ruined my life." "Your life was already ruined," he roared, his control finally snapping. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into my skin, and backed me against the oak tree. His face was inches from mine, his golden eyes blazing with a fire that was equal parts anger and something else, something that looked a lot like pain. "You were a ghost in your own pack, and you know it. Hiding in the corners, letting them walk all over you. At least now they see you." The raw truth of his words stole the breath from my lungs. Our angry breaths mingled in the small space between us. The fury that had been boiling in my veins began to change, morphing into a different kind of heat. A confusing, terrifying pull that hummed in my blood. His gaze dropped to my lips. His hand came up, his thumb gently, hesitantly, brushing away a stray tear from my cheek. The forbidden touch was a lightning strike. "This bond," he murmured, his voice now a rough whisper. "It's a madness. I can't stay away from you. It's like gravity, like breathing. I have to find you, even when I know I shouldn't." He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to kiss me. But then he pulled back, a muscle in his jaw clenching as he fought for control. "Meet me at the old boundary stone," he commanded softly. "2 nights from now, after moonrise. There's something you need to see." And then he was gone, melting back into the woods, leaving me shaking against the tree, my anger hopelessly tangled with a dangerous, fluttering curiosity. Chapter 8. A Debt Marked in Blood. For 2 days, I wrestled with his command. Going to meet him was insane. It was treason. It was exactly what my pack already accused me of. But not going. That felt impossible. The memory of his touch, the raw pain in his voice, the promise of a secret, it was a hook I couldn't shake loose. Curiosity, a braver and more foolish part of me, won out. I slipped out of the village after moonrise, moving through the familiar forest like a wraith. The air was thick with the scent of pine and coming rain. The boundary stone was on the far side of our territory, a lonely place no one ever visited. The perfect spot for a secret meeting. Or an ambush. A flicker of fear went through me, but I pushed it down. He had saved my life once. Why would he hurt me now? I was halfway there when a rustle in the bushes ahead made me freeze. It wasn't Adrian. The scent was wrong. It was familiar and filled with malice. Jax and 2 of his friends stepped out onto the path, blocking my way. Their faces were twisted into ugly sneers under the pale moonlight. "Well, well," Jax drawled, his eyes roaming over me with a look of pure disgust. Look what we have here, the traitor sneaking off to meet her alpha. Get out of my way, Jax, I said, my voice shaking only slightly. This has nothing to do with you. Oh, it has everything to do with us, one of his friends snarled. You bring shame on this pack, you stink of him. Jax took a slow, deliberate step forward. We're just going to teach you a little lesson, he said, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. A reminder of who you belong to. Maybe a new scar on that pretty face, something your Blackwood lover won't find so appealing. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just bullying. This was poison. He lunged, and I stumbled back, crying out as his friend grabbed my arm. But before his hand could connect with my face, a blur of motion exploded from the trees. It was Adrian. He moved with a silence and speed that wasn't natural, a predator unleashed. There was no argument, no warning, just swift, brutal violence. He slammed his fist into the face of the wolf holding me, the crack of bone echoing through the night. He spun and drove his elbow into Jax's stomach, doubling him over. The third wolf drew a knife, but Adrian was faster, disarming him and breaking his wrist in a single fluid motion. He grabbed Jax by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The next time you touch her, Adrian's voice was a low, lethal hiss, a sound more terrifying than any shout. I will tear your pack apart from the inside out, starting with you. He threw Jax to the ground like a broken doll. Then he turned to me, and the murderous rage in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a raw, urgent concern that made my heart ache. Did they hurt you? He asked, his hands hovering over my arms, afraid to touch me. I could only shake my head, staring at the absolute carnage he had wrought for my sake. My own pack had tried to destroy me, and the enemy had just declared himself my only shield. Chapter 9. Scars and Whispers. He didn't speak again. He simply took my hand, his grip gentle but firm, and led me away from the whimpering forms of my packmates. We didn't go to the boundary stone. Instead, he took me deeper into the woods, along a path so faint I would have never found it, to a hidden fissure in a rock face veiled by a curtain of ancient ivy. Inside was a small, dry cave, sheltered and safe. A fire pit sat in the center with wood already stacked, and worn furs were laid out over the floor. It was a secret refuge. His refuge. They cut you? I whispered, my voice hoarse. I pointed to a shallow gash on his forearm, already beginning to heal but still bleeding sluggishly. It was from the third wolf's knife. He glanced down at it as if he'd forgotten it was there. It's nothing. It is not nothing, I insisted, a strange boldness rising in me. He had gotten hurt protecting me. I owed him this. Let me clean it. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression made him relent. He sat down on one of the furs, his back against the cool stone wall, and watched me with those intense golden eyes as I searched the cave. I found a small, clean cloth tucked away in a crevice and dipped it in a trickle of fresh water that ran down one of the cave walls. I knelt before him, the space between us charged with a new kind of tension. It wasn't anger or fear. It was intimacy. My touch was hesitant as I dabbed at the blood on his arm. His muscles tensed beneath my fingers, but he didn't pull away. As I worked, my gaze traced the network of other scars that marked his skin. Thin white lines, jagged puckered flesh, a map of 1,000 violent battles. How did you get these? I asked softly, my fingers brushing over a particularly nasty, curved scar that wrapped around his ribs. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. My father, he finally said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He was the alpha before me. He believed strength was the only virtue, and that it could only be forged in pain. This one, he tapped the scar over his ribs, was for my 10th birthday. A lesson in obedience. The simple, brutal confession hit me like a physical blow. I looked up from his skin and met his eyes. For the first time, I saw past the powerful, terrifying alpha of the Blackwood pack. I saw a boy who had been hurt, a survivor who had been forged in a fire far crueler than my own lonely existence. He wasn't just a predator. He was a warrior scarred from the inside out. The air grew thick with unspoken understanding. We were two broken pieces from opposing worlds, finding a strange solace in a hidden cave. He watched me, his guard completely down for the first time. "No one has ever been here before," he whispered, the admission a raw, vulnerable thing. "I've never shown this place to anyone." The confession was more intimate than any touch, a fragile offering of trust that bound me to him more tightly than any fated bond ever could. Chapter 10. The Blackwood Curse. The confession of his father's cruelty hung in the small cave, a shared vulnerability that felt more intimate than any touch. For the first time since he'd crashed into my life, a fragile sense of peace settled in my heart. Here, hidden from the hate of my pack and the dangers of the world, I felt safe. The warmth from his body, the quiet crackle of the small fire he'd lit, the steady rhythm of his breathing, it all combined to soothe the raw edges of my soul. This closeness, however, was a dangerous comfort. It fanned the embers of the bond between us into a blazing fire. It was a living current in the air, a magnetic pull so strong it was a physical effort to keep from leaning into him. I had to know. I had to understand the storm I saw in his eyes whenever this energy sparked between us. "Adrian," I began, my voice a soft murmur in the quiet space. "This bond, I feel it. I know you do too. So why do you fight it so hard? Why does it feel like you're running from the one thing that could save us both?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. He pulled away from the wall, the warmth leaving with him, and paced the small confines of the cave like a caged wolf. The air grew thick with his turmoil. "Because it wouldn't save us, Ella," he said, his back to me, his voice rough with a pain that terrified me. "It would save me, and it would destroy you." I stood up, my confusion warring with a rising dread. "What are you talking about? Mates are supposed to make each other stronger." "Not my bloodline," he bit out, turning to face me. The raw agony in his expression was a sight I would never forget. "My family is different. We're tainted, cursed." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Centuries ago, the first Blackwood Alpha made a pact with a dark spirit for power. He was granted strength beyond any other wolf, but it came with a price, a poison that has passed down through every alpha in my line. It lies dormant until the fated bond is fully completed." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A cold dread washed over me. "What does it do?" "The curse feeds on the bond," he explained, his words heavy and sharp as shards of glass. "It magnifies the Alpha's power, making him almost invincible. But it draws that power directly from his mate. It drains her. It feeds on her life force until there's nothing left. My grandfather did it to his mate. She withered away to nothing while he became a legend. I watched it happen." His confession was a death knell to the fragile hope that had been growing in my heart. All his actions, the pushing me away, the anger, the desperation, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He wasn't afraid of the bond because he hated me. He was afraid of it because it was a weapon pointed directly at my heart. He wasn't protecting himself from me. He was protecting me from himself. He could desire me, he could protect me, but he could never truly claim me without it becoming a death sentence. Chapter 11. A Ghost Between Us. The sanctuary of the cave had transformed into a tomb. The air, once warm and intimate, was now icy with the weight of his revelation, the Blackwood curse, a love that kills. The beautiful, impossible connection I had just started to accept was nothing more than a slow, agonizing poison. My mind reeled, trying to process the sheer cruelty of it all. To finally be seen by someone, only to learn that their love would be the thing that made me fade away forever. A part of me wanted to run, to flee from this new terrible reality. But another, stronger part was rooted to the spot, my heart aching with a profound empathy for the man standing before me. What a terrible burden to carry. To know that finding your other half meant becoming their executioner. My father, Adrian continued, his voice low and strained as he stared into the fire, lost in a painful memory. He spent his life searching for a way to break it. He was obsessed. He believed the answer wasn't in dark magic, but in old lore, in balancing the scales. He was working with someone, a healer from a rival pack. My attention sharpened, a strange premonition prickling at my skin. This she-wolf, Adrian went on, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She knew the ancient ways. My father said she was gentle, but incredibly powerful. They believed they were close to a solution, a ritual that could purify the bloodline. But she was killed. A rogue attack near the border, years ago. After that, my father lost all hope. Every word was a hammer blow against my heart. A gentle she-wolf, a healer, a rogue attack near the border. The details swirled together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. A memory, cold and distant, of my own pack's elders telling me my mother's death was a result of her weakness, of wandering too far from safety. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Adrian, I whispered, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. What was her name? He looked up from the fire, his brow furrowed in confusion at my tone. He didn't understand the abyss that was opening up beneath my feet. He just answered the question. My father called her Liana. The name shattered my world. Liana, my mother. It couldn't be. My mother wasn't just a random victim. She was entangled with the Blackwood Alpha, the sworn enemy of our people. She had been helping him. All the stories I'd been told, all the pity and scorn I had endured because of her weakness, it was all a lie. My mother was brave, she was powerful, and her secret had gotten her killed. The fragile trust I had just placed in Adrian curdled into a new, sickening horror. His family and mine were not just rivals, they were entwined in a secret that had led to her death. A cold fury rose within me, chasing away the shock. The ghost of my mother now stood between us, and her face was screaming betrayal. I looked at the man I was starting to believe was my destiny, and asked the one question that could destroy us forever. What did your father do to my mother? Chapter 12. The Price of a Choice. The accusation hung in the charged air of the cave, a poisoned dart. Adrian stared at me, his golden eyes wide with shock as the pieces slammed together in his own mind. Liana. Your mother? The realization washed over his face, followed by a look of profound horror that mirrored my own. He was as stunned as I was. No, he breathed, taking a step toward me, his hands raised as if to prove he had no weapon. No, Ella. My father. He revered her. He spoke of her with a respect he gave no one else. Her death, it broke him. He never recovered. He would never have harmed her. His denial was passionate, his sincerity a raw, undeniable force. But my grief and betrayal were a thick wall around my heart. For years, I had believed a lie about my mother's death. Now, the only thing I knew for sure was that it was tied to the very man, the very family, I was fated to be with. How can you be sure? I demanded, my voice shaking with a decade of buried pain. Your packs have been at war for generations. Maybe she found out something she shouldn't have. Maybe the rogue attack was a convenient lie to cover his tracks. Don't you see? He countered, his voice rising with a desperate urgency. He took another step, closing the distance between us. This changes everything. It's not a coincidence. Our parents were working together, trying to fix this curse. Her death wasn't the end of their story. We are. The idea was insane. It was impossible. But as I looked at him, at the fierce hope warring with despair in his eyes, a sliver of his desperate logic pierced my own anger. What they started, we can finish, he pressed on, his voice dropping to a low, intense plea. The answer to breaking my curse? It might be hidden in your mother's legacy, In the lore she knew, knowledge that your pack has probably buried or forgotten to hide her secret. He was right about one thing. My pack would have buried the truth. They would have painted my mother as weak to hide the fact that she was consorting with the enemy, even if it was for a noble cause. The stakes of our situation had just grown immensely. This was no longer just about a dangerous, forbidden love. It was about uncovering a conspiracy, redeeming my mother's name, and potentially finding the one thing that could save us both. But the path he suggested was terrifying. It meant trusting him, the son of the man who was, at best, indirectly responsible for my mother's death. It meant defying my own pack, digging into secrets they had clearly killed to protect. It meant embracing a bond that could still be a death sentence for me if we failed. Surrendering to our fate wasn't just a personal choice anymore. It was a gamble that could either rewrite our history or doom us to repeat it. I looked at Adrian, seeing him clearly for the first time. He wasn't just my mate or my enemy. He was a fellow prisoner of our parents' legacy, a man haunted by a curse just as I was haunted by a ghost. And in his eyes I saw the reflection of my own impossible choice: run from the past or risk everything to become its future. Chapter 13. A Bond Forged in Fire. The truth of our parents' past settled between us in the firelit cave, a fragile bridge across a chasm of lies. In that moment, staring into Adrian's golden eyes, I made a choice. It wasn't a decision made with logic, but with a deeper, more primal instinct. The soul-deep certainty that this man, this curse, this impossible tangle of fate, this was my path. I stepped forward, closing the small space he'd left between us, and placed my hand over his heart. I felt the steady, powerful beat beneath my palm. "I believe you," I whispered, the words a vow. "I believe our parents were trying to do something good. I choose to finish it with you." A shudder went through his powerful frame. He covered my hand with his own, his thumb stroking my skin, sending sparks up my arm. The tension in the cave shifted, the air growing thick and heavy with unspoken desire. The fear of the curse was still there, a cold shadow in the corner, but it was dwarfed by the burning need to feel, to connect, to defy the cruel fate that sought to keep us apart. This was our one moment of peace, a stolen breath in the heart of a storm, and we were not going to waste it in fear. He lowered his head, his lips hovering just above mine. "Ella," he murmured, his voice a raw plea. "The curse. If we do this, there's no going back. The bond will strengthen. It will begin." "I know," I breathed, my own voice trembling with a mixture of terror and desperate longing. "I'm not afraid of you." It was the truest thing I had ever said. His lips met mine and the world fell away. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of two starving souls, a raw, desperate claiming. It was years of loneliness and a lifetime of pain being burned away by a searing heat. He tangled his hands in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us, only the frantic beating of two hearts. We sank down onto the soft furs before the fire, a tangle of limbs and breathless sighs. This was more than just passion. It was an act of rebellion. Every touch was a protest. Every kiss a declaration that we would not be defined by the sins of our fathers or the hatred of our packs. In that hidden cave, we were not a Blackwood and a rival. We were just Ella and Adrian. As our bodies finally joined, a pulse of energy, white-hot and blinding, erupted from the center of my chest, flowing into him and back into me. It was the bond, partially sealing, a golden thread weaving our souls together. It was the most beautiful, profound feeling I had ever experienced. But as the blinding light faded, I felt it. A tiny, cold flicker deep inside. A faint, almost imperceptible drain on my energy. It was the curse, awakened by our love, whispering the first hint of its deadly promise. Chapter 14. The Price of a Claim. We lay tangled in the furs, wrapped in a fragile, temporary peace. The newly forged bond between us was a warm, humming presence, a constant connection that made me feel less alone than I ever had in my life. The cold whisper of the curse was still there, a chilling counterpoint to the warmth, but for now we ignored it. We had to. We spoke in low murmurs, making plans. My mother must have hidden her research, her notes on the curse, somewhere safe. A place no one in our pack would ever think to look. My old family hut, I said, the memory surfacing. It's been abandoned since she died. They said it was unlucky. A perfect hiding place, Adrian agreed, his voice a low rumble against my ear. But as we plotted, a sharp sound from outside the cave entrance shattered the quiet, the scrape of a boot on stone. Adrian was on his feet in an instant, his body shielding mine, a low growl building in his chest. His eyes were fixed on the ivy-covered entrance. The scent that wafted in was not from my pack. It was his own. Blackwood wolves. But something was wrong. The smell was tainted with aggression, with a bitter scent of insubordination. The ivy curtain was torn aside, and 3 large warriors stepped into the cave, their expressions hard and unforgiving. The one in the lead, a brutal-looking wolf with a scarred face, I recognized from the whispers as Kale, Adrian's second-in-command. "Alpha," Kale said, his voice dripping with disapproval. He pointedly ignored me, his eyes burning a hole into Adrian. "We followed your scent. The pack is in an uproar. You abandoned the ceremony for this." His gaze finally flickered to me, full of contempt. "They say you are bewitched, that this rival she-wolf has made you weak." "She is my mate," Adrian snarled, his voice dropping to a lethal calm that was far more terrifying than any shout. "You will show her respect." Kyle laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Respect? For the thing that will be our downfall? The pack demands we end this disgrace. Now." He and his warriors lunged. The cave exploded into a whirlwind of violence. Adrian met them head-on, a force of pure, untamed fury. It was different from when he fought the rogues. This was personal. This was betrayal. He moved with brutal efficiency, breaking bones, disabling his own men with a terrifying ruthlessness. But in the chaos, one of the warriors scrambled past him, his eyes locked on me with murderous intent. "The witch must die," he roared. There was no time to scream, no time to hide. As he leaped for me, a primal instinct I never knew I possessed took over. I didn't cower. I didn't freeze. I snatched a heavy piece of firewood from the pile beside the hearth and swung with all my might. The wood connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He dropped like a stone. I stood over him, panting, the heavy club still in my hands, adrenaline singing in my veins. The invisible girl was gone. In her place was someone who would not go down without a fight. Chapter 15. To be the fire. The fight was over. Kale and his followers were broken and bleeding on the cave floor. Adrian stood over them, his chest heaving, his face a mask of cold, terrifying rage. The betrayal from his own second-in-command, the threat to me, it had pushed him past a breaking point. "Get out," he snarled, his voice dangerously low. "Go back and tell the pack what happens when they question my claim. Tell them what happens when they threaten my mate. This is the only warning you will get." Scrambling and whimpering, the disgraced warriors dragged themselves out of the cave and disappeared into the night. The silence they left behind was heavy, filled with the scent of blood and the grim reality of our situation. We were now outcasts to everyone, enemies of my pack, traitors to his. There was no safe harbor left for us in the world. "They will not stop," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "They see me as your weakness." Adrian turned to me, the fury in his eyes softening as he took in my determined stance, the piece of firewood still clutched in my hand. "Then I will remove anyone who sees you that way," he vowed, his voice raw with conviction. He closed his eyes, and I felt a strange shift in the air, a thrum of immense power gathering around him. A silent message, a telepathic howl of pure dominance ripped across the territories. It wasn't just for his pack. I could feel it stretching, reaching for the borders of my own. Ella is my fated mate. She is under my protection. Any who challenge this claim, any who threaten her from any pack, will face me. This is not a request. It is a declaration. This is war. The sheer force of his will was breathtaking. He had just drawn a line in the sand and dared the entire world to cross it. But as I watched him, the alpha who was willing to burn everything down to protect me, a profound clarity washed over me. The girl who cowered in the shadows was well and truly gone, burned away by the events of the last few days. I looked down at my trembling hands, at the splintered wood. My first act of violence, my first act of self-preservation. It felt right. I dropped the wood and met his gaze, my own resolve hardening into steel. "You can't do this alone, Adrian," I said, my voice clear and strong, without a hint of its old tremor. "You declared a war to protect me. Now, you need to teach me how to fight in it. I will not be the weakness they use to break you. I will not just be protected." A look of stunned surprise, followed by a fierce, blazing pride, lit up his face. He saw the change in me, the fire that had been ignited. He saw not a victim to be saved, but a partner to stand with. "I will be the fire at your side," I vowed, not just to him but to myself. The invisible girl was dead. A queen was learning to stand. Chapter 16. A whisper of hope. A kiss of poison. The war Adrian had declared was a quiet, suffocating thing. We were nomads in our own lands, moving between the hidden places only he knew, the cave our most frequent sanctuary. Days were spent in a tense rhythm of survival and preparation. He taught me how to move like a shadow, how to quiet my breathing, how to turn my fear into a weapon. We trained until my muscles screamed and my body ached, but with every bruise and every lesson, a new strength took root inside me. I was no longer a ghost, I was becoming a blade. Our nights were a stark contrast, filled with a desperate, gentle intimacy. We were two souls clinging to each other in the dark, the partially formed bond a constant humming reassurance between us. It was during one of these quiet nights that our first glimmer of hope arrived. An old she-wolf from Adrian's pack, a healer named Lyra, found us. Her face was a kind map of wrinkles, her eyes filled with a deep sorrow as she looked at us. She denounced Kale's treachery and swore her loyalty to her true alpha and his chosen mate. "I knew his mother," she said, her voice a soft, comforting rasp. "She fought against this curse with all she had, and I know your mother, Liana, was helping her." The words were a balm to my raw, suspicious heart. Lyra spoke of my mother with a reverence that made tears spring to my eyes. She seemed to be the one ally we had left in the world. For a week, she stayed with us, sharing stories, her knowledge of ancient lore a flickering candle in our darkness. Then, she came to us with a revelation. "I know where Liana kept her research," Lyra announced, her eyes shining with excitement. "A hidden shrine in the neutral lands, protected by old magic. The lore says only a daughter of her bloodline can open it." The news was a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope. A cure. An end to this nightmare. It felt within reach. But Lyra's plan was dangerous. "Alpha Marcus of the Stonecrest Pack has been sniffing around the border since your declaration," she explained. "The shrine is too close to his territory. We'll need a diversion. Adrian, you must draw his warriors west. While they are distracted, I will guide Ella to the shrine. It is the only way." Splitting up felt wrong, a tearing of something essential. But the chance to find my mother's work, to free Adrian from his family's poison, it was a chance we had to take. Adrian was reluctant, his protective instincts warring with the logic of the plan. Before he left, he pulled me into a fierce embrace, his lips crashing down on mine, in a kiss that was both a promise and a prayer. "Be safe, Ella," he murmured against my skin. "Always." I watched him disappear into the trees, a powerful shadow on his way to draw the fire of our enemies. I felt no fear. I turned to Lyra, my heart full of a desperate, foolish trust. Chapter 17. The Shrine of Lies. The journey with Lyra was filled with a nervous energy. She was a comforting presence, telling me gentle stories of the pack before Adrian's father had hardened it, painting a picture of a world I hoped we could one day build. My hope was a fragile, fluttering bird in my chest, and Lyra's words were the wind beneath its wings. All the while, the curse was a faint, cold thrum beneath my skin, a constant reminder of why we were doing this. The farther Adrian went on his diversion, the more I felt its subtle pull, a tiny leech on my soul that made my steps feel just a little heavier. "We're here," Lyra finally whispered, stopping at the edge of a clearing. My hope faltered. This was no shrine. It was a scar on the land, a circle of dead skeletal trees and gray, lifeless earth. The air was cold and smelled of decay. A deep sense of wrongness crawled over my skin, but I pushed it down. Magic often chose strange places. "The entrance is in the center," Lyra urged, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "It will only respond to you, child. Close your eyes. Focus on your mother, on your bloodline. Call to her." I trusted her. I had no reason not to. I walked to the center of the dead clearing and did as she said. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath and picturing my mother's face, the faint memory I had of her smile. I focused on the warmth of my own blood, calling out to her in the silence of my heart. "Mother, please, help me." A sharp, stinging prick in my neck. My eyes flew open. The world was tilting, the dead trees spinning in a nauseating vortex. My legs gave out and I crumpled to the ground, my limbs suddenly numb and useless. Wolfsbane. The bitter, metallic taste of it flooded my mouth. I looked up, my vision blurring, and saw Lyra standing over me. The kind, gentle healer was gone. In her place was a stranger with eyes as cold and hard as river stones. Her face was a mask of triumphant righteousness. "The Blackwood line is a disease," she snarled, her voice a venomous hiss. "His obsession with you has made the sickness fatal. It is my duty to the pack to see it cured." From the shadows of the dead trees, more figures emerged. Alpha Marcus of the Stonecrest pack stepped into the clearing, a cruel, satisfied smirk on his face. He was flanked by a dozen of his largest warriors. The shrine wasn't a hiding place for a cure. It was a cage. The hope in my chest died, replaced by the icy agony of betrayal. "He will come for me," I choked out, the poison stealing my breath. Marcus laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Yes," he said, looking down at me as if I were something he'd scraped off his boot. "That's the point." The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was Lyra's face, utterly devoid of pity. She had not saved me. She had sacrificed me. Chapter 18. When the fire goes out, I awoke to the clank of chains and the coppery scent of my own blood. I was in a cage, a crude metal prison in what felt like a damp stone dungeon. My body was on fire, the wolfsbane a liquid poison in my veins, making every breath an agony. It severed the connection to my inner wolf, leaving me feeling hollowed out, terrifyingly human. The curse, no longer held at bay by Adrian's proximity, feasted on my weakened state, a relentless drain that pulled me deeper into the shadows. Alpha Marcus stood outside the cage, cleaning a long, cruel-looking knife. "He's coming," he said, his voice casual, as if discussing the weather. I can feel his rage shaking the mountains, a blind, stupid animal running right into my trap. He walked to the cage and unlocked it, dragging me out by my hair. The world swam, a dizzying mess of pain and fear. He held the knife to my arm, pressing the tip in just enough to draw a fresh line of blood. "A little more scent on the air for him," he mused. "A little more desperation." Just as he finished, a roar of pure, unadulterated fury ripped through the dungeons, a sound that was not just a challenge but a promise of annihilation. Adrian was here. The fight when it came was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Adrian was no longer an alpha. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of black fur and claws and teeth, fueled by the agony of a severed bond. He tore through Marcus's warriors, his only focus the cage at the far end of the room. He was a blur of death, single-minded and absolute. I watched through a haze of pain as he fought his way toward me, his body taking wounds that would have felled any other wolf. He was unstoppable. He was magnificent. He was too late. Seeing Adrian about to reach me, Marcus let out a snarl of frustration and turned his rage on me. "If he will not be broken," he roared, "then his precious toy will be." A flash of silver. A searing, white-hot agony erupted in my side as his silver-tipped blade plunged deep. A scream tore from my throat, a sound of pure, unholy pain. Adrian's answering roar was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. He exploded with a new, terrifying power, the curse flaring around him like a black fire. He threw Marcus across the room like a rag doll and was at my side in an instant, shifting back to human form. He ripped the bars of the cage apart with his bare hands and gathered my bleeding body into his arms. "Ella, no, no," he chanted, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face as he pressed his hands to my wound, trying to stop the bleeding. But it was no use. The silver, the wolfsbane, the curse, they were all devouring me from the inside out. My fire was dying. I looked up at his beautiful, anguished face, my vision tunneling to black. All my life I had been the unseen, the unworthy. For a brief, shining moment, he had made me feel chosen. But in the end, the world had proven my deepest fear to be true. My old wound, the core of my being, whispered its final, devastating truth. Maybe, I breathed, my last bit of air a ragged, broken whisper. Maybe I was never meant to be chosen. Chapter 19. A Vow Against the Dying Light. I was floating in a cold, gray nothingness. The pain from the silver blade was a distant, throbbing star, and my own life felt like a candle flame sputtering in a gale. I could feel Adrian's arms around me, a desperate, solid anchor in the void, but I was slipping away. His voice was a frantic litany of prayers and pleas, but they were sounds from a world I was no longer a part of. The curse was a triumphant beast, feasting on my fading life force, pulling me under. I felt his grief, a tidal wave of agony that washed over our bond, and in it, I felt him consider the curse's dark promise, the offer of ultimate power in exchange for my last breath. He could let me go and become a god. For a moment, a terrible, selfish part of him was tempted to give in to the despair, to accept this as his punishment. But then, my own broken whisper echoed in the space between us. Maybe I was never meant to be chosen. The memory of my words seemed to shatter his despair, replacing it with a defiant, thunderous rage. "No!" A roar ripped from his soul, a sound directed not at our enemies, but at fate itself. He was not giving up. He was not letting me go. In a move that went against 1,000 years of his bloodline's dark history, he chose love. He chose me. I felt a sharp, new pain as his teeth sank into the flesh of his own wrist. A split second later, his bleeding arm was pressed against my lips. "Drink," he commanded, his voice a raw, desperate rasp. His own blood, rich with his alpha life force, flooded my mouth. It was a shocking, unprecedented act. Instead of letting the curse siphon my life away, he was fighting it, forcing his own vitality, his own essence, through the bond and into me. It was an excruciating sacrifice. I could feel his strength pouring into me, a torrent of raw power that battled the silver poison and the wolfsbane. It was a fire that chased the chilling tendrils of the curse back into the shadows. I felt his own energy depleting, his life force weakening as he gave more and more of himself to me. The world of gray began to recede. The cold was replaced by a fragile warmth. I was still lost in the darkness, but I was no longer sinking. I was tethered. As my consciousness drifted, pulled back from the brink of oblivion, I heard his voice not with my ears, but with my soul. A vow that became the new cornerstone of my existence. I choose you, Ella. In this life and every other, I will always choose you. His words were a lifeline in the darkness, the one solid thing in a world that had fallen apart. He had made his choice. Now, I had to make mine. Chapter 20, Shedding a Ghost Skin. I was a little girl again, standing in the corner of the great hall. The world was a blur of feasting, laughing wolves who looked right through me. My mother stood across the room, her back to me, and with every step she took, she faded further into the shadows until she was gone. The whispers started then, the voices of my life's failures slithering around me. Unworthy, hissed Jax. Weak, sneered Mark. A disease, snarled Lyra. My own voice, a hopeless, broken whisper, joined the chorus. You were never meant to be chosen. I stood there, a small, invisible ghost, and I believed them. It was easier to believe them. The darkness behind my mother's fading form looked peaceful. It was a place of quiet, of no more pain, of no more trying. I took a step toward it, ready to let go, ready to finally disappear completely. I choose you. Adrian's voice cut through the ghostly whispers, a beacon of pure, golden light in the suffocating gray. It was not a plea. It was a fact. A declaration that defied the shadows. The light grew brighter, and in it, I saw another memory, one I had long buried. My mother, kneeling before me in a field of wildflowers, her hands on my small shoulders. Her face was not sad or weak. It was fierce with love. Don't you ever let them make you small, my little wolf. Her voice echoed, strong and clear. You were born to be a fire. I looked at the small, trembling ghost child that was me, cowering before the whispers. I saw the shield of invisibility she held up, the one I had mistaken for my own skin for so long. It wasn't a curse that had been placed on me. It was a choice I had made every single day to hide from the pain of being ignored. That shield had protected me once, but now it was a cage, and the darkness it offered was a lie. Adrian had chosen me. My mother had believed in me. Now it was my turn. I turned my back on the beckoning darkness and faced the ghostly whispers. No, I said, my voice starting as a tremor but growing with every word. I am not weak. I am not unworthy. I looked directly at the spectral image of my younger self. And I am not invisible, I declared, my voice ringing with a power I never knew I possessed. I was just hiding. With that final declaration, the gray world shattered like glass. I fought my way up through layers of pain and darkness, swimming toward the sound of a steady, beating heart. I chose to live. I chose to be seen. My eyes fluttered open. I was in the hidden cave, lying on the soft furs. Adrian was slumped by my side, his face pale and etched with exhaustion, his life force dangerously low. He looked up as I stirred, and his golden eyes widened with exhausted relief. The first words from my lips were not of pain or fear, but of purpose. Where is my mother's research? The fire was lit. Chapter 21. The Gathering of Outcasts. 2 days passed in a blur of healing and planning. I was still weak, the silver poison leaving a deep ache in my bones. But my spirit was forged anew. The girl who had hidden in the shadows was gone, and in her place was a she-wolf who knew her own worth. Adrian was recovering more slowly. Giving me so much of his life force had left him depleted, his alpha power muted. We were vulnerable, 2 lone wolves against the world. We knew we couldn't face Alpha Marcus and the traitors in Adrian's pack alone. We needed allies. There are others, Adrian said, his voice still raspy, as we shared a meager meal of dried meat. Wolves in my pack who were loyal to my mother. They believed in a pack built on respect, not fear. My father and Kale drove them into the shadows, but they never broke. He explained his plan. There was a secret way to communicate, a series of scent markers his mother had established years ago for her network of healers and scouts. It was a risk. If Kale's patrols found the message, it would lead them right to us, but it was a risk we had to take. That night, Adrian slipped out of the cave and left the call, a complex message of camellia blossoms and pine sap left at the base of an ancient willow tree. Then, we waited. The next evening, a reply came. A single fresh camellia blossom left on a stone outside our cave. The meeting was set. We met them in a hidden glade, deep in the oldest part of the forest. There were only 5 of them, older wolves with graying muzzles and eyes that held the wisdom of many hard seasons. They looked at Adrian with respect, but their gazes on me were filled with a deep, weary suspicion. To them, I was still the rival, the source of all this chaos. Before Adrian could speak, I stepped forward. I would not hide behind him. "My name is Ella," I began, my voice clear and steady. I met each of their gazes, letting them see the truth in my eyes. I told them everything. About my mother, Liana, and her work with Adrian's father. About the curse. About Lyra's poisonous betrayal and Marcus's trap. I did not ask for their pity or their help. I simply laid out the truth. My truth. "I am done hiding," I finished, my voice ringing with conviction. "I will not be the weakness that destroys your alpha. I will be the partner who helps him find the cure that both of our parents died searching for." The silence that followed was heavy. Then, the eldest wolf, a she-wolf with kind, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. "I knew Liana," she said softly, "and I knew Adrian's mother. I see them both in you. You have their fire." She turned to the others. "Our pack has lost its way. We will not stand by and let a tyrant like Marcus, aided by traitors like Lyra and Kale, destroy it. We stand with our true alpha, and we stand with his mate." A murmur of assent went through the small group. They were not an army, but they were loyal, and they had information. "Marcus betrayed Lyra," the old she-wolf revealed, her voice grim. "He holds her prisoner at Stonecrest. He plans to attack your pack during the blood moon just 2 nights from now. He will use the chaos to kill Kale and seize control of what's left." The final pieces clicked into place. We now had a timetable and a clear, impossible goal. We had to stop a war, save a pack that hated me, and find my mother's hidden research before the blood moon rose. The final push had truly begun. Chapter 22. My Mother's Fire. The night of the blood moon arrived, painting the sky in strokes of sick, crimson light. The air was heavy, electric with impending violence. Our small band of allies confirmed the worst. Marcus's warriors were on the move, a hungry tide flowing toward the already fractured Blackwood pack. Time was no longer a river. It was a waterfall, and we were plummeting toward the rocks below. There was only one chance, one desperate gamble left to us. We had to get to my mother's research. Guided by the allies who knew the land and shielded by Adrian's grim determination, we made a mad dash through the darkening woods to the place I once called home. The abandoned hut stood exactly as I remembered, a skeletal silhouette against the bloody moon. It was a place of ghosts, heavy with the dust of forgotten memories. Pushing aside the rotted door, I stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old herbs and lost time. While our allies stood guard, Adrian and I searched. I ran my hands over the cold hearth, the place I always remembered being inexplicably warm, even long after the fire had died. My fingers brushed against a loose stone. A pull, a thrum of recognition from my own blood, guided me. Working together, we pried it free. Beneath it was a hidden compartment, lined with cedar to ward off the damp. Inside lay a worn, leather-bound journal and 3 small corked vials containing a liquid that shimmered with a faint, silvery light. My hands trembled as I opened the journal. It was her handwriting, a graceful script I only vaguely remembered. It was all there. Her notes on the Blackwood curse, her correspondence with Adrian's father, their shared hope. The cure she had created was not a simple potion to be drunk. It was a ritual, a delicate and dangerous piece of magic. It required 2 things, a willing sacrifice of power from the alpha, given freely, and the untainted life force of the fated mate, combined under the light of the blood moon. The vials held the catalyst, a potent elixir of crushed moon petal flowers. My eyes fell on the final entry, my mother's last words blurring through my tears. For my Ella. May you live a life free of these shadows. But if fate is cruel, know this. Love is the final ingredient. It is the only magic strong enough to turn the poison back into power. Just as the final word registered in my heart, a howl ripped through the night, sharp and close. The battle had begun. We had the cure, but the war was already at our door. Chapter 23. The Queen's Gambit. We arrived at the edge of the Blackwood clearing to a scene from a nightmare. The blood moon cast a hellish red glow over the chaos as Stonecrest warriors clashed with the deeply outnumbered Blackwood pack. Cale, his face a mask of grim fury, was trying to rally a defense around the Alpha's den, but his lines were breaking. It was a slaughter. At the heart of the storm was Alpha Marcus, a brutal whirlwind of fur and claws, cutting a bloody path toward the heart of the territory. There was no more time for strategy. Adrian gave me a final, desperate look, his eyes conveying a universe of love and fear. I clutched the vials and the journal to my chest as he transformed, a seamless ripple of muscle and bone into the massive black wolf. He let out a deafening roar of challenge and launched himself into the fray, a black arrow aimed directly at Marcus. Their collision was an explosion of alpha fury. They tore at each other, two titans locked in a battle for dominance. While the world devolved into a symphony of snarls and screams, I was an island of desperate calm. Sheltered by the loyal elders, I uncorked the vials. I took the ceremonial knife the she-wolf offered, and without hesitation, pricked my own thumb, letting a single drop of my blood fall into the silvery liquid. It swirled, turning a soft, glowing gold. This was it. All I had to do was wait for Adrian to drink it. But the fight was turning. Adrian, still weakened, was faltering. Marcus was a brute, fueled by a mad hunger for power, and he landed a devastating blow that sent Adrian crashing to the ground. As Marcus raised his claws for the killing strike, a flash of gray fur intercepted the blow. It was Cale. In a final desperate act of loyalty to his pack, to his alpha, he threw himself in the way, taking the fatal blow meant for Adrian. The sacrifice bought a single precious second. And in that second, I made a choice. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Love is the final ingredient. It turns the poison back into power. It wasn't about being a passive ingredient. It was about action. It was about choice. I didn't run to Adrian. I didn't try to force the potion down his throat. I lifted the vial to my own lips and drank it all. A supernova of golden light erupted from my body. It was not a gentle warmth, it was a fire, searing and absolute. My mother's magic, the catalyst, my own life force, and my love for Adrian combined, not to make me a cure, but to make me a conduit. I was the power. Marcus, stunned by Cale's sacrifice and my impossible transformation, turned on me. "A little witch," he snarled, lunging, "just like your mother." He was fast, but I was faster. I met his charge, my movements fluid and sure. I sidestepped his clumsy attack, snatched the silver knife he'd dropped earlier, and with a roar that was torn from my own soul, I plunged it deep into his heart. Silence fell. The fighting stopped. Marcus looked down at the blade, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief before his body dissolved into a shower of black dust. I stood in the center of the battlefield, panting, glowing, and utterly, completely visible. Chapter 24. I see you. The golden fire receded, leaving an ocean of exhaustion in its wake. My legs gave out, and I crumpled to the ground, the silver knife clattering against the blood-soaked earth. The battle was over. I was alive. Adrian, shifting back to his human form, scrambled to my side. He was battered, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but his eyes were filled with a wild, incredulous light. He pulled me into his arms, holding me as if I were the most precious, fragile thing in the universe. "Ella," he breathed, his voice cracking with emotion. As his skin touched mine, a new light, softer and purer than the fire of the ritual, bloomed between us. It was a gentle, steady warmth that wrapped around us like a blanket, sinking deep into our bones. The cold, parasitic whisper of the curse was gone. In its place was a clean, unbreakable hum of connection. The bond was sealed not by fate, but by choice. Not by poison, but by love. It was finally, truly, ours. The remaining warriors, both Blackwood and Stonecrest, stared in silent, dumbfounded awe. From the edge of the clearing, our allies brought Lyra forward, her face a twisted mask of defeat and disbelief. Her plot had failed, and in its place something new and powerful had been born. Weeks later, I walked back into my old Pax village. I was not a ghost returning to her haunt. I was a queen. Adrian was at my side, his presence a quiet statement of unity. The wolves of my pack, led by a humbled and weary Alistair, parted before us. They looked at me, and for the first time, they truly saw me. Not the weak, invisible girl, not the traitor. They saw the she-wolf who had ended a war, the mate of the Blackwood Alpha, a power in her own right. I felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of peace. Their opinions no longer had the power to define me. I had finally defined myself. That night, Adrian and I stood on a high cliff overlooking the now peaceful territories. The war was over. The traitors were being dealt with justly. The long, bloody history between our packs had a chance to finally heal. The future was a blank page, waiting for us to write it. He turned me to face him, his hands gently cupping my face. The moonlight illuminated the love and profound reverence in his golden eyes, a look that held all the battles we had fought and all the peace we had won. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, his voice a soft, sacred vow that was both an end and a beginning. "I see you, Ella," he whispered. "Always."